lot of mainstream people like can't make ends meet. Their cost of living is going up. Nobody's cost of living is going down. It's just that for a segment of the population, people who sort of made their advanced moves, whether it's moving to, moving out of a high tax country like Canada, or being in businesses that do better in the digital economy. It's like you got that class of people who are like moving their asset value up faster than the degradation of the currency, and then a lot of people who are just kind of like it moved too fast and they're behind the curve, and all they know is everything is getting more expensive and going up faster.
Welcome back to the Collapse Life podcast. I'm Zara Sethna, your host. With Donald Trump's return to the White House, cryptocurrencies and meme coins are back in the spotlight big time. We can expect lots of debates about their role in politics, regulation, and the future of finance. So, to help us cut through the noise and explore what lies ahead, today we're joined by Mark Jeftovic, the Bitcoin capitalist and founder of Bomb Thrower Media. Mark, thanks for coming back. It's so nice to see you again.
Yeah, hi Zara, great to be back on the show.
There's lots to talk about. It
Oh
hasn't
god.
even been 1 week since Donald Trump's back in the White House, and tons to talk about.
Yeah,
Um,
I created a RSS feed in my mail reader, so I'm out of the executive orders coming out of the White House, so I'm sort of getting them in real time, and I'm like, oh my god, oh my god.
yeah, they're mounting up. And just yesterday, there was one with regard to CBDCs and digital currencies. So I wanted to go over that with you. But right before the inauguration, Trump surprised everyone with the launch of this meme coin that sort of overnight went to something like $72 billion or something. So I think you're the perfect person to help us understand what is a meme coin in the first place. And um, is it different from cryptocurrency?
Where to start on this one? So yeah, the launch of the Trump coin was quite an event, probably a game changer in the space. So a meme coin, cryptocurrencies have different, different breeds, different variations, and your typical crypto, and I'll include Bitcoin, even though the Bitcoiners like to think of themselves as separate from crypto, but they all run on a blockchain, and those blockchains are called like layer ones. So Bitcoin runs on the Bitcoin blockchain. Ethereum is supposed to be this global computer. It's a different kind of blockchain that you can execute a larger set of commands on it than you could on Bitcoin. And then there are other blockchains. There's dozens of them, hundreds of them, probably thousands of layer ones, and they all sort of try to bring a different value proposition to the market. A meme coin usually a meme coin happens on top of one of the other layer ones. I say usually because the very first meme coin was Dogecoin, and it's a layer one unto itself that doesn't actually really do anything other than exist, right? And so that's kind of where meme coin comes from, is that this thing doesn't do anything other than it's there, right?
Mhm.
And it's governed by a smart contract, and the smart contract states the parameters as to how many tokens exist and what the unlock period is. And really, the best way, I guess, to wrap your head around a meme coin in sort of normie terms is like a loyalty points club,
Okay.
like a loyalty, it's a club Z point, or it's sort of like membership in a community, membership in an e-tribe, but there isn't actually anything that the meme coin does, right? Not like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana. And I
Mhm.
mentioned Solana because Solana is the layer one blockchain where I would say 75 to 80% of this meme coin action happens on Solana.
Okay.
And then there's some on Ethereum, and there's some on Base, and there's even some on Bitcoin, but most of it happens on Solana. And what it really is kind of like a tribal branding loyalty points club. And it's completely market driven. just like
Right.
if something captures the public's imagination, it moons. And if it doesn't, it flops. There's a lot of times, like if you look at the chart, there's like thousands of these things coming out a day, because you can go to a website like pump.fun and you can create your own meme coin, and it costs you nothing,
Right.
or it costs you like, a fraction of one Solana. And you go to these places and people just launch them, and people will launch them without having any connection to the underlying meme that they launch. Like they'll see something happen in the news and they'll just log into pump.fun and quickly throw together a website and an icon and a graphic, and they'll launch the meme coin.
Right.
Um, Trump was different because it was tweeted from Trump's Twitter account. And when I first saw it, this was like 3 hours in, I came across it and I'm like, this has to be an account compromise,
Right.
right?
A lot of
And
people thought that. Yeah.
it had already hit 8 or 9 billion when I saw it, and this was 3 hours in. I'm like, this has to be a Twitter compromise. And it's funny because I'm like, and this is around, I guess, around 10:30, 11 o'clock. Watch a show with my wife. Around 1:30, I'm going to bed, and I just sort of like send a quick message to no, I send a quick message to Steve Bannon. I'm like, is this thing real? And I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning, and he sent me back a message like an hour later saying, dude, I have no idea. But then by then, I see this another message from Trump's Truth Social account. It's the same message from there. So I'm like, okay, this thing is real. And by then, it had hit 30 billion or 33 billion. So it changed the game in the sense that, so when someone who is actually central to the meme, like launches the meme, like they
Mhm.
have the action, it's like an endorsement. And so that thing has an extra gravitas to it, as opposed to someone who just sort of latches onto it and just launches it. Do you remember the last thing I'll say on it? Because I know you got a lot of questions. Do you
No problem.
remember in November, there was this sort of like brouhaha about the duct tape banana that sold on
Yeah. Yeah.
Sotheby's, and it was like a duct tape banana, and it sold for $6 million.
Yeah.
Okay, so that the progression of that is interesting from a mimetic standpoint. Someone else created a meme coin around duct tape banana, right? And actually, many people did it, but the first mover did it, and the meme coin went to 144 million in market cap, right? So the so-called art sold for 6 million and raised a bunch of eyebrows. The meme coin, which was created by some rando, went to 144 million, right? So it dwarfed it, and that shows you the strength of this sort of almost like a mind virus. They're
Yeah.
contagious when they
Yeah.
happen, right? So when the incoming president of the United States jumps behind one, it's just like pouring gasoline on a fire. Like, to be honest, Zara, if I would have noticed that like 2.5 hours earlier when it was like sub 1 billion, I probably would have pushed all of my Solana into it, because it was,
Really.
yeah, like, just okay, let's just ride this thing, you know?
So,
Uh Sorry, go ahead.
one thing though, so I mean, it's just layer upon layer of um crazy. It feels like, because I'm one of those normies, I guess, that you described before, where I it's so hard to understand this. But so the rando that created the banana meme coin, did
Yeah.
they actually take any money into their pocket, or is it just in some sort of wallet in the cloud? What does that look like?
Well, so forgive me if I get the actual mechanics not 100% correctly, but let's say you
Theoretically.
do this on a like a sort of public facing platform like a pump.fun, right? You create the meme coin and you can put some of your own Solana into it to sort of create the initial liquidity pool. But then as people pile onto it thing, and a lot of like people are creating robots that are sort of looking for the next meme coin launch, and some of these people just put a trickle of of capital into everything that launches in their pro. It's almost like high frequency traded for trading for meme coins, right?
Mhm.
So these Telegram bots and these robots are like almost more of the action than the humans. And so if something, there's this bonding curve on pump.fun. So if this thing starts getting enough momentum behind it, it moves up the bonding curve and sort of vests when it hits a certain point. Um, I think it's 500,000 or 5 million market cap. Then it sort of like graduates. And then when it graduates from the pump.fun bonding curve, uh, it will probably get picked up by like a decentralized exchange like Radium, okay,
Okay.
which is its own sort of, it's like Coinbase but decentralized and sort of specializes in Solana, and so 99% of its volume is meme coins, and it has its own token, by the way, right? So I'll get to that in a second why I mention it. So it goes up the bonding curve. It gets onto radium. By the time it's on radium, then it sort of goes everywhere. And as it keeps going up, then things will happen. Like let's say CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap, it sort of gets on their radar. So they're sort of like the Bloomberg terminal of crypto prices. So it's kind of gone mainstream.
Mhm.
And then when you start to see the centralized exchanges say, we're going to start allowing trading on this asset, then it's really hitting the big time. And within 48 hours, like Coinbase and Binance, the two largest exchanges in the world, picked up Trump coin. And it was like, okay, this thing is just, now it's part of the woodwork. Now this is part of the scenario or part of the crypto landscape. So the person, let's say you're playing a lottery ticket and you create a meme coin on pump.fun and you just put half a Solana in, which is like $150, you've got like, I don't know, you got 10 million of these tokens because there's like 5 zeros in front of it after the decimal place when it originally gets created. Now, if it works its way all the way up the bonding curve, suddenly these things are like, even if it goes to a tenth of a cent, right? You're sitting on a lot of money there. So you can
Mhm.
start selling as it works up the bonding curve. And you can do quite well on that. I mean, it is a 1 in a million shot. But again, when the president of the United States and the president meme coin did not, it wasn't like just launched on pump.fun. It's like there was a team behind it that was
Mhm.
creating it in the days leading up to this launch. And they actually went with a proper liquidity pool, which is a little outside of the range of what we're talking about, but you have to have liquidity. You have to
Mhm.
have like a market maker sitting in the middle that will like clear all the buys and sells so that the buyers and the sellers can find each other and you actually earn a yield by serving as that market maker. So they set
Right.
that up and they set custody. And so they actually executed it quite well and properly as opposed to just like taking a flyer on pump.fun. But
Right.
it's a lot
Which
to take in. But
it is, and it sort of what you just described illustrates that this was done very purposefully and
yes.
with a plan. And so I think you're right in saying that it's a bit of a game changer, even for those of us who are still catching up and trying to understand what it all means. It feels like crypto is the nature of it is changing. It's no longer crypto; it's mainstream. It's in the White House. It's becoming or it already is a viable form of investment and capital. And so, talk a little bit about what you think will happen in the short term with now this kind of crypto president.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of, speculation and debate around what exactly does this mean. And I think one of the best explanations I've heard for this, it was on the Empire podcast from Blockworks. They were talking about it. I follow that show, and they said, for the last 10 years, the entire domestic crypto industry in the United States has been operating under this assumption of hostility from the regulators and the government, right? It's like, what can we do without going to prison? You like we've got these regulators that hate us. We have these legislators that hate us. Um, yes, there was a lot of lobbying and pleading their case, and you could say that they had that they've you know experienced resounding success with that. But what this means with this particular moment in time means is that all of this has flipped. And
Mhm.
we now have a crypto friendly legislative and regulatory apparatus in the United States. And that really, like, you thought crypto was taking the world by storm over the last 10 years. Like now just watch what's going to happen.
Right.
And so with the launch of the Trump coin, 0 to 77 billion in 48 hours, fully diluted. Now that's fully diluted. Like it was actually, a fraction of that, maybe a tenth of that, like floating in the market, but it's still otherworldly.
Mhm.
People are talking about that, saying that's very toppy. This is end of cycle. This is what you see at the end. And even for a while, I'm like, yeah, this feels like really crazy. But then when I go back and look at previous cycles in crypto, there's this sort of 4 step phase, like 1, 2, 3, 1 step. It's like you have this point, this stealth bull, then you have this like bull, and then you have this third phase that Raoul Paul calls the banana zone, where it's like everybody says this is the top, but you're really just going parabolic, and it just makes your head explode.
Mhm.
This has kicked off that phase, right? The banana zone is here. It's going to keep going until this narrative runs out of steam. And I don't know what unplugs this narrative, but
Mhm.
it is just getting started. So it's really hang on for dear life and don't do anything crazy, you know?
Right. As an individual. So, in terms of regulation, I mean, so crypto was always, in my understanding, a system that sort of sat outside the mainstream system and was anonymous, and therefore people accused it of being, the love child of people who were doing illegal things. So, what will regulation look like? What do people within the industry want in terms of regulation, and what are the regulators pushing for?
So the big one that just happened yesterday was, and I can't remember the number, was it 71? SB 71 from the Biden era was repealed yesterday or rescinded. So that was done by an executive order, and that barred banks from custodying Bitcoin and other crypto assets. And now this opens the path for banks to say, we can now enter the Bitcoin custody business, right?
Mhm.
And that's a good thing, especially because I mean we're talking trillions of dollars here now, right? And individuals could be holding anywhere from, how much Bitcoin does it take for you to have before you want to say, all right, maybe I always want to have a portion of this on my own cold wallet or memorized in my brain wallet, but at some point, right? How much does this have to be worth before I go to an institutional multi-sig custodian that I trust to say, okay, we're going to set up like a 3 of 5 key multi-sig. So if I get hit by a truck, my wife can still, or my business or my board of directors can still access the Bitcoin, right? We've heard horror stories about that. So the banks can now get into the custody business, and they have their entire like infrastructure for that. There are already crypto companies that are way ahead of them, like Coinbase is a de facto bank now, and this opens the path to them to go the rest of the way.
Mhm.
But the 1-2 punch of that is now what people can't wrap their heads around is Bitcoin being an inelastic deflationary currency instead of an elastic inflationary one. And so what happens with dollars, you're like borrowing dollars and they're getting less, they're becoming worth less over time. So the more you
Right.
borrow, the better it is. With Bitcoin, there's this reverse dynamic there, which we now have a path to, which is instead of selling your Bitcoin to buy a house, right, you can borrow fiat dollars against your Bitcoin, keep your Bitcoin, and buy the house, right?
Huh.
And the banks are the natural players to be doing that. There's already companies doing it today. There's a Canadian company, well, they re-domiciled to the Caymans called Ledin.io that does these Bitcoin loans. And so do some of the other places. So, and Coinbase just started. So this, what's happening is Bitcoin is becoming part of the plumbing, is the phrase I always use, of
Hmm.
the real world financial system.
Right.
And people are having different reactions to that. Like some people are like, "Oh, Bitcoin is selling out. It was supposed to be anti-establishment, and it's not supposed to be. There's not supposed to be the government buying Bitcoin." And you know, there's supposed to is kind of like a pointless term,
Okay.
right? If Bitcoin was going to succeed, right, this is what it looks like. It takes over everything, right? Hyper Bitcoinization is taking over the world. And so the world is going to adapt to this new emerging monetary system. And this is how it's going to look. I think it's naive to think that hyper Bitcoinization was going to happen and it was going to happen without banks and legislators and governments and treasuries, like, and none of that. They were just going to like, no, we're just going to go down with the ship and let's
Right.
watch all of our amassed wealth go to zero. Like that was never going to happen. So
Right. Um, a couple of questions that come up in my mind. One is we're talking about Bitcoin. It has Bitcoin become like the generic term for cryptocurrency, like Kleenex, or are we talking specifically Bitcoin versus any other crypto?
so Bitcoin is a category of one. It's the gold standard of digital assets. It is the base layer, right? It's the dial tone of the entire space. The Bitcoin maxis will always be quick to point out that Bitcoin is not crypto. It is, but they like to say it's not. I call it, I'm not a Bitcoin maxi. I'm what's called Bitcoin primacy, right? Bitcoin will always be number one. It's hit this escape velocity that will never be overtaken.
Mhm.
Everything else is crypto, right? And everything else is up for grabs. So in prior cycles, there were these flippening narratives. It's like, will Ethereum ever flip in Bitcoin, like become
Mhm.
the number one cryptocurrency? It will never happen. However, there are real flippening narratives for number two and number three and number four, right? Like Ethereum might get flipped by Solana on this cycle.
Mhm.
Ripple, which I have to admit, I underplayed it or undervalued it, and we don't have a position, and we never will. And we can get into why, but it's gone from number six to number three in the
Right.
last
Okay.
couple of months. Like it's flipping, a few things. So these things happen, but Bitcoin will always be number one. It will
Got it.
always be a category of one. Even the other cryptocurrencies on the real, diehard exchanges, they measure the pairs against Bitcoin, right? So it's like
Mhm.
Sol slash BTC, ETH slash BTC.
Mhm.
It's the base layer.
So, talk about the excitement that happened last summer when there was mention of building a strategic national Bitcoin stockpot. Um, what are the pros and cons of that? Is that realistic? Is that good thing?
Yeah, I think so. You're referring to when Trump went to Bitcoin 2024 conference in Nashville, and he gave a landmark speech, and he said a few things. He said, day one, I get reelected, because the backstory to this is the crypto industry, and I am including Bitcoin, like the royal we, did a lot of lobbying and they did a lot of campaigning for Trump,
Yeah.
right? The crypto lobby was one of the largest campaign contributors to the Republicans across the whole ticket, like up and down ticket for this election.
Mm.
They put a lot of muscle behind them. Um, it's the way the game is played. Why not? Right? I mean, you've got choice A, this side of the aisle hates you. Choice B, this side of the aisle loves you. What are you gonna do? So
Yeah.
anyway, he gave this landmark speech. He said, I get in day one. I pardon Ross Ulbricht, who's sort of this hero of the Bitcoin space. You can argue whether he was justly or unjustly imprisoned or the length of the term that he received. Day one, I fire Gary Gensler from the SEC, and I'm going to establish a Bitcoin strategic reserve to stockpile Bitcoin on the country's balance sheet. So November, whatever, 5th comes and goes. He wins by a landslide. And so it's like, is he going to follow through on his promises? So he did pardon Albrecht. So that happened.
Mhm.
Uh, Gensler quit pretty well the moment the election results were in because he knew you can't fire me. I quit. So that takes care of itself. Is he going to do the SBR, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve? There was an EO executive order that came out yesterday, and I think everyone was sort of waiting for, like, is he going to just press a button and smash by a million Bitcoin, right?
Mhm.
Is that how this is going to play out? In retrospect, I think it was a little naive to think that. I was expecting personally an executive order to direct law enforcement agencies in America to say we're no longer going to dispose of our duly seized Bitcoin, like once it clears the legal process. Right now, when they seize Bitcoin and it goes through the courts and the court, renders its verdict, and then the Bitcoin proceeds of a crime like money laundering or whatever are seized, it goes through this disposal process and it works its way out, and then actually Coinbase is their partner that they use to sort of just sell it onto the
Mhm.
open market. And I thought he would say from now on all of that just goes to the strategic reserve. It would put about at least 80 to 100,000 Bitcoin right there. But what he did instead yesterday was he formed a committee. We're going to meet, we're going to put these people together, we're going to figure out the best way to do this. So this is happening, but it just didn't happen as like, oh, we're buying a million Bitcoin today, right? So no God candle on Bitcoin, which is probably good if you want to accumulate a ton of it. And it's going to play out over the next 90 days to 6 months,
Mhm.
and that's what's going to happen. And to the chagrin of the Bitcoin maxis, they're like, oh, it's not going to be a strategic Bitcoin reserve, it's going to be a strategic crypto reserve, which means all these other you know Bitcoins that doesn't starts with sh will be on there, right? Like altcoins. And I think it's going to be a mixture of both. I think there's going to be this bedrock of Bitcoin, and they're probably going to have some other stuff in there, and that's just the way of the world.
Mhm. Just turning to the BRICS alliance for a second. So at the recent Davos conference, the World Economic Forum, CEO of Coinbase was on a panel with the head of South Africa's central bank,
Yeah.
and the Coinbase guy was talking about the beauty of crypto and it's the future, blah blah blah. The South African central bank chief said, Bitcoin as a reserve asset is like having strategic reserves of apples. Um, we have to have something that has intrinsic value, like gold. And so there seems to be lining up kind of two opposing views in different parts of the world where the BRICS countries are buying up gold and America's going all in on crypto as you just described. What would you say in response to that type of conversation?
Well, one thing I didn't say in the last point, which leads into this, is the creation of a strategic Bitcoin reserve changes the game theory behind Bitcoin geopolitically internationally, right? So if the United States is building a Bitcoin reserve, every other country in the world has to decide, do we enter this space race, or do we fight against it, right?
Mhm.
Do we do something different? And so enter the BRICS nations, who have been clearly buying up gold like crazy. Um, United States still has the largest reserves of gold anyway. So they're all, well, I don't know if it's the largest anymore, but they're still sitting on a ton of this stuff. Um, so the South African guy, I mean, I know he was trying to make a point, but it was like, okay, for one thing, apples and mutton and the other examples he threw out, like they're not like they're not durable.
There is a history to gold. There was once a gold standard. Currencies were pegged to gold. But if we now say that, okay, bitcoins, okay, what about platinum? What about coal? Why don't we hold strategic beef reserves or mutton reserves or apple reserves? Why Bitcoin?
Right? You can't put 10 million apples in a warehouse and keep them for 20 years, right?
Mhm. Fair.
Bitcoin can live on the blockchain forever, and we all know gold, exists for as long as you can store it. So it was like really bad examples. And countries do have strategic reserves of perishable goods. There's a strategic petroleum reserve in the
Mm.
US. But what is happening between the US and these other nations is just this perception. Like, so what is intrinsic value? Like, gold has intrinsic value. Gold is a shiny rock. Like, how much intrinsic value does it has? I mean, I ascribe intrinsic value is not intrinsic, it's subjective, no matter
Mm.
what it is. Even Bitcoin, even gold, even a dollar bill, especially a dollar bill, it's all subjective value. There's no such thing as intrinsic value. So it's like, what is consensus reality ascribing to it? And the thing is, Bitcoin has these sort of, I'll call it, ideological underpinnings to it that give it this intrinsic value of this inelastic, hard backed currency backed by energy there will never be more than 21 million. And people are accepting it as something that's valuable and has money like properties. And better than gold, it can be shifted around the world in a microsecond, right? Like that's
Mhm.
the big advantage. So you almost, as I think about this, you almost have like a new world, old world dynamic where, yeah, gold is great. I still have my gold kicking around here. I still like love being a gold bug, but um, it's very industrial era, right? You have to dig
Mhm.
it out of the ground. If I have to flee this jurisdiction in a hurry, I can't really take any meaningful amount of it with me. It's
Mhm.
heavy, right? It's hard to move. It's hard to store. Whereas Bitcoin is like new era, right? It's a new paradigm. It's this decentralized network age that the world is undeniably moving into, that I can take with me by memorizing 12 words, right? So it's a different headspace. It's a different configuration of how all this works. Um, I don't like the one versus the other mindset. To me, everything builds on top of the other, right? Like you have
Mhm.
some serious crypto maxis who say, we're inventing our own rules of physics in this, virtual world, and we're going to upload our minds into the metaverse. It's like none of that's going to happen. At the end of the day, we live in the real world. This is a real pen. I'm talking to you over physical gear, even though we are conversing in cyberspace. So I like these layers, right? I
Yeah.
live in a physical house. I always will. I have physical gold, physical silver. I have investments in gold companies and silver companies. But on top of that, I have this decentralized layer of digital assets.
Yeah.
And one builds on top of the other. It's integrative, not adversarial in my mind. At least that's always been the way I look at it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting mindset shift, I think, for many people who have been seeing these as just two binary opposing forces. And the conversation about the BRICS nations, them coming up with an alternative currency based on hard assets to um, oppose or counterbalance the US dollar, has kind of played into that binary. Um, where do you see that going? And do you think it would be advantageous for the BRICS countries to actually come up with their own competing digital instrument?
Well, the other big narrative is the central bank digital currencies. And because the BRICS nations are kind of like, with the exception of India, which is supposedly the world's biggest democracy, we're talking China and Russia, which are, among the more authoritarian regimes on earth.
Hmm.
So if they come up with anything digital, it's probably going to lean more in the direction of central bank digital currencies, which are more like lubricants for authoritarianism than digital stores of value.
Hmm.
I don't see anyone like the BRICS can't just simply come up and say, we're creating a new cryptocurrency to compete with Bitcoin and we're going to stockpile that. Like, that's just not going to happen. If they want to get in the game and say, okay, you know what? The Western nations and other nations are starting to create these SBRs. Maybe we should too.
Hmm.
Um, they will just go with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the currency of enemies, the money of enemies. It's like it's decentralized to the point where it's like, okay, we can either trade with each other or we can fight with each other, and we're going to need this base layer to do the trade with each other part, and the only way to do it is going to be with Bitcoin. So
Yeah. Talk about the latest executive order. I think it was also yesterday from Trump about CBDCs. I believe he said that they will never, well, not never, in the 4 years
yeah,
of his presidency, they will not be allowed. CBDCs will not be allowed in the United States. Is that accurate?
it was part of the same EO that formed this advisory council that's going to map out how all this moves forward.
Hmm.
Um, he's been saying, I will never allow a CBDC. I okay, he can say that. The Donald says a lot of things. I just think that there will be globally this push to CBDCs in one way or another. Whether they have to call it something else
Hmm.
remains to be seen. We've seen, I think, about 11 or 12 individual states in the U.S. have already passed legislation that forbids federal CBDCs. And so what I've been kind of expecting, and this extends well out past this next term of the presidency, is there could be a kind of balkanization of CBDCs in the US, where I think these states that are passing laws barring federal CBDCs are kind of trying to earmark that territory for themselves, right?
Really?
So we're barring federal CBDCs, but hey, guess what? Now there's Montana coin, right? And it's a state level CBDC. I can see that happening.
Mm.
Um, but this push towards CBDCs is kind of inexorable, and in the US they may have to go there out of expediency, because the dollar could blow up at any moment. I mean,
Yeah.
when I say any moment, I mean like within the next 10 years, right?
Hmm.
So CBDCs and stable coins will probably be seen as this extension to extend the runway of the fiat dollar like
Right.
another few decades.
Right.
They will always be distinct from cryptocurrencies, but I think they're going to happen. Maybe they just rebrand it as something else. Like, up here in Canada, they're talking about getting rid of the carbon tax, but what they really mean is they're going to call it something else.
Yeah,
So,
it'll be back. Yeah. I,
yeah.
I feel you on that. So you think just going back to the sort of the explosion of the US economy, you think it's going to take 10 years? I mean, this time last year we were talking about economic collapse within probably 6 to 12 months. Now all of a sudden there's this little bit of euphoria with the changing administration, whatever. What do you think is happening just sort of on that economic frame um, overall?
The global monetary financial system is flashing bright red warning lights. It started well. I mean, it's been sort of this ongoing unraveling that's been, you know, pick your time frame, how long it's been going on for. But when the Fed did that 50 basis point cut in September, suddenly the long end of the yield curve went the wrong direction, and it's been going the wrong direction ever since. And so that's ringing alarm bells. No one's really paying attention to it.
Yeah.
It's only really being remarked upon in sort of the alternative media. But that speaks volumes that this system is in big trouble, and no amount of euphoria is going to fix it. We're having this even kind of goes back to the whole meme coin discussion. I think we're in a crack up boom, like a slow motion crack up boom, which is, Austrian school economics thing, where we're in this phase now where the public hasn't really lost faith in the currency, but people who are sort of a little ahead of the curve in terms of understanding what's going on are doing this, are engaging in what is called financial nihilism. That's not my term. It's Dimitri Kofinas from Hidden Forces, I think, coined that phrase, which is, I know saving money in dollars is pointless because I'm being robbed by inflation and this is just going away. I don't have 10 or 20 years to compound at a reasonable rate of interest, right? To just even buy a decent company that's going to spin off 10% a year, if you can find one. I need a moonshot. I need a moonshot that's going to work. So you can do this meme coin thing, and you only have to be right once, and you've got life-changing wealth, right? I mean, Bitcoin, it's comparatively to these meme coins is a glacial progression, even though it's been leveling up, by orders of magnitude every 4 years. So I think we're in this sort of catastrophic boom is the literal translation from the German term. And we kind of have both at once. Like, a lot of mainstream people can't make ends meet. Their cost of living is going up. Nobody's cost of living is going down. It's just that for a segment of the population, people who sort of made their advanced moves, whether it's moving out of a high tax country like Canada, or being in businesses that do better in the digital economy, it's like you got that class of people who are like moving their asset value up faster than the degradation of the currency, and then a lot of people who are just kind of like, it moved too fast and they're behind the curve, and all they know is everything is getting more expensive and going up faster than they're right. So you have this bifurcation, you have this big split happening. So wealth inequality is getting worse, whether it's Trump, whether Polyev wins here, whatever. It's just getting worse, and I don't even know how to fix that, really.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see kind of Hugo Stein type plays, people taking that kind of approach? Is this the time for it?
That's already happening. I mean,
Is
that's MicroStrategy, right? That's what Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy is doing, is he's levering up and he's buying Bitcoin. Hugo Stein's, I mean, for your viewers, just quick review: Weimar Germany, 1920s. I think in like 1915, Hugo Stein's inherits a small conglomerate from his father when he died, and he saw the hyperinflation coming, and so he just borrowed as many marks as possible, and he bought hard assets like shipyards, railways, coal mines. He just levered up to the wazoo and bought everything. And he turned that little conglomerate into the largest industrial concern in Germany. That's what, Michael Saylor is doing today with MicroStrategy, and more companies are doing it now too. Sol Strategies, a little company trading on the CSE exchange in Canada, is like levering up to buy Solana and Solana validators, right? Neptune Digital, just, same thing, except they're all levering up dollars to buy cryptocurrencies, right? Because crypto, Bitcoin has a compounding rate of like 65% a year minimum, right? And MicroStrategy is issuing debt, convertible bonds at like less than 1%. So it's so asymmetrical. It's not really said out loud. It's not really said in polite company, but I think people are already doing this. People are borrowing money to buy, rental properties and stuff. I mean, interest rates are elevated, but if you call 5% elevated, but even they're coming down because there's too much debt. So that's pretty well what's happening. It's
Mhm.
not really being spoken out loud, but that's the play right now.
It's crazy. Uh, we're coming to the end, but I wanted to ask one thing. I was reading a piece that you wrote recently on bomb thrower,
Hmm.
and I'm just going to read one sentence because I want you to explain it
Okay.
and unpack it a little bit. So you said Bitcoin places heavy emphasis on personal fitness, contemplative practices, and family, which overflows into a kind of tribalism that I predict will come to define this era. Talk a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. So this is almost a distinctive from the crypto bros, who I think are kind of almost utopian transhumanists who think
Mhm.
like, they are going to invent this blockchain that replaces the laws of physics, which is not going to happen. The Bitcoin crowd is a bit more. You talk to a lot of, like, I started noticing this, I guess, in 2022. Okay, there's a lot of Christians in Bitcoin, right? Like, just Bible thumping Christians. uh I don't identify as a Christian, I identify as a spiritual person, but like, they weren't into this sort of like flashy crypto bro lifestyle. They're more likely, whether they're, avowed Christians or not, the Bitcoin crowd is almost more likely to be owning a ranch,
Mhm.
working a hobby farm, even though they've got these online businesses. They're seriously family oriented. Like, every eminent Bitcoiner that I know is family first, right? Family, friends, community, uh, personal fitness, working out. It's this radical self reliance. It's almost this Protestant work ethic applied to the modern age. And I'm seeing that in the Bitcoin space. And what's happening, you're having different types of these dynamics happening all over the world, but it's all part of what I think is like the decline of the nation state. The nation state isn't going away, but the relevance of the nation state has to give way to these emerging things. And there's this sort of pan national tribalism that is setting in across all kinds of different, you know, uh, centers of interest. And Bitcoin is one of them. So that for people being Bitcoiners, it's like being a Bitcoiner is more central to their identity than being a citizen of a nation state.
Mhm.
Right? It's the laser eyes speak more than, the name of the country and the passport.
Mhm. It's so interesting because it feels there's a little bit of tension there because if Bitcoin is being associated with this ultra self-reliance and this, I'm going to create a little homestead where I can live off the land and provide for myself and my family and a small community of like-minded thinkers, but at the same time we now have lobbyists throwing tons of money around to get crypto friendly politicians elected. Those two don't seem to be the same philosophy anymore.
It's guerrilla warfare, right?
Hmm.
And that's the way the game is played in these national capitals. And so, that's how they played the game.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of they take a lot of heat from the Bitcoin purist community, but Bitcoin Magazine went a long way to orange pilling Trump and his team and a lot of legislators, and said, this is the way to go. And I think they made, they pushed this space forward quite a bit.
Interesting. Well, final words, Mark. What do you think is the sort of most underreported narrative within this space that people should be looking out for in the short term?
I think, for now, it's everyone thinks CBDCs, like China social credit style CBDCs, are a dead thing. And I would just say, let's not take our eye off the ball. I think that will always be lurking in the background, and I think that is the inexorable direction of almost every Western central bank. And so it may fade from the public spotlight for the next few years, but I think that's the one to really watch.
Wow. Amazing. Mark, I'm so happy to see you again. I'm so grateful for you coming on and sharing all this with us. And I hope that we can do it again before too long.
Yeah, whenever you want. Happy to come on again. Good to see you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for tuning into Collapse Life. Let us know what your thoughts are on crypto in the comments. And also, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Explore more about us at collapselife.com. You'll find our blog, shop, and links to all our social media channels where you can interact with us. And then come back and join us again next week for another deep dive into civilization and demise. We look forward to seeing you. And until then, just remember, keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.